Well, good morning. I'm glad you joined us on this cold day, right? We got one of those Alexa things at Christmas. I didn't buy it. Somebody gave it as a gift. So I asked her this morning, I said, Alexa, how cold is it outside? To which she said, you spell outside O-U-T-S-I-D-E. So I asked her again, and she said it was 14 degrees, which I thought, again, must have been a mistake, because how could it be so pretty and be 14 degrees? But it is. So, hey, I'm glad you joined us. We're kicking off a brand new message series today called Adulting. And you may think it's targeted at a certain age, and the reality is, it is. But let's think about it. There's some of us that are past the whole, kind of thinking about adulting. We've been adults for what seems like a very long time. But I want you to think back to when you were a teenager. It could even be in your preteen ages, and you thought about that idea of freedom, right? And in your heart and in your mind, it was that idea that soon and very soon, I'm going to be out of this place. And I can do what I want. In fact, something goes like this. It was this idea of freedom, that we want freedom to do what we want, when we want, how we want, with whom we want. And for no one to get hurt, because we didn't want anybody to get hurt in that whole process, right? But that whole idea of freedom, and I can be my own person, I can set my own schedule, I can choose what I want to do, I can get up when I want to get up, I can go to bed when I want up, this whole appeal of freedom. And then comes that moment when you actually get that freedom, and life hits you. And you have all those questions about, why does somebody need so much insurance, right? I'm not planning to get in a wreck with my car, and I'm just renting this place. It's not even my place. Why would I have insurance? And, all this stuff hits us. And let me just give you a quick definition of adulting. Adulting is making a bunch of small decisions every day that before you didn't even know people make, right? It just seems like it's one thing after another after another. And there's this crazy revelation that happens. It's a very important revelation that happens, that when you begin to adult, when you've moved out of the house and you're on your own, and it happens the very first time that you run out of this. Because up to this point in your life, every time you ran out of this, there was some more in the house. But now, it has become an extinct item. That's on the verge of extinction, at least, unless you does something about it, right? And one of the other great revelations of being an adult is you discover it's not just toilet paper, right? You go to the cupboard, you look at your favorite cereal, and it's not there. In fact, I saw this great chart on how this works. This is a chart, I saw this out of some book. It says, toilet paper need over time. Do you need toilet paper? At age 0, the answer is no. But very quickly it goes up to yes. And it goes all the way across until death happens, right? And isn't that a great picture of the reminder of how important toilet paper is? And how you have never given it any other thought up until you become now an adult. Free to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, with whom I want. But now I'm hit with all these little choices and decisions come along with it. The reality is this is going to be our major point, underlines this whole series, and it's simply this, that life is all about choices, right? We think as a teenager it's not about choices, it's about being free to do whatever I want, and all of a sudden we are hit with choices. And there's another thing that comes along with this idea of choices, and it's this, right? And you probably have learned that early, that, if you say, yes, I'm going to the prom with this person, that means I'm saying no to this other person. And sometimes you decide you really want to go with this other person, so you tell the first one, no, I want to go. And then they're caught with that, just choices and decisions and all the costs that go along with it. But it's part of being an adult. And the thing that we don't think we want to do becomes the thing that we have to do, because choices are always there as a part of life. And there's always this cost, and the cost is not necessarily a bad one, it's just that there's always a cost with every choice. And here's the reality. If you are you're a teenager in here, you're in your 20s, you haven't quite got to that stage of where you're this whole adult thing, and you think about that, you kind of feel like you're an adult, you're ready to make these decisions, but you're kind of unclear in that. I just want you to know something. I'm going to give you a glimpse this morning of reality. I want everybody who's over the age of 35 to answer this question. All right? How many of you feel younger than you actually are? Raise your hand. Nice and high. Want all you younger folks, anybody under 35, to look around and notice this, all right? Put your hands down. Another question. How many times do you discover something in life at your current age, as old as you are, that you think, I don't know how to do this? See, one of the things that happens when you're first adulting is you run into all these choices, all these decisions, and some stuff comes natural, and other stuff it's like, I have no idea how to do this. So I must not be doing it. I must not be an adult, because isn't this part of being an adult? The answer is yes, but adulting is not just having it all figured out. Oftentimes there are times that a lot of us that are older than the early ages of adulthood look back and think of our lives and think, I don't have this figured out at all. I wonder how my parents did this, right? And here's the thing I want you to know. We've all felt the unsettling feeling that our life is wobbly and unmanageable, and it doesn't make a difference what age you are. That is true. And for you young folks here today, and you think adulthood is about having this all figured out, being secure and safe, and just everything falls into place, I'm sorry to say that's not true. But I want you to know that's not true, because everybody wrestles with this whole idea. And the challenge right now, if you're entering into that adulthood age, is this idea of how you're going to feel about it and what you're going to do about it. My youngest son came over to my house last Sunday and helped me lay sheetrock. I've been trying to refinish my basement for over a year now. It's a slow process. So whenever I can get an extra hand, I take an extra hand. And so he came over, and I took him out to dinner because that was a good way to pay him back, right? But we were doing something, and he had been telling me some stuff he'd been doing at his house. And he said to me, I just, I'm not sure how I know how to do this. And I just feel terrible that I seem like I should just know how to do this. To which I had to tell him, son, that's what YouTube is for. You are blessed to live in an age of YouTube, right? Because you can turn it and get it. But I go on YouTube. How many folks over 35 go on YouTube to figure out the answer to something? Raise your hand nice and high, all right? Young folks, look at this again, all right? You are not alone in this. This is not just a you thing. This is a universal thing, that adulting is a thing no matter what age you are. And so we're going to spend a few weeks talking about adulting, these keys to figuring it out. And I will be very honest with you. This morning, the Bible doesn't say anything about adulting in the sense of a list. There is no book of adulting in your Bible. Doesn't have a list of the things that an adult does that somebody that isn't an adult that does. But it does offer some principles, some glimpses into maybe how to become this thing that in our minds we're not sure about, in our bodies because of our age, we are at that point. So before we jump into one of these principles today, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray together, right? Lord, there are moments when we feel so unsure of ourselves. There are moments when we feel like we don't have a clue what to do or how to get out of the situation we find ourselves in. There are times when we don't feel our age because we don't feel like we're capable enough. But I pray you would take that universal feeling today as we begin this series and help remind us that it isn't always about being perfect at everything or even good at everything. It's about being willing to make those choices, willing to learn, willing to try and to fail, willing to go on a journey, not just with ourselves, but with you. and to enjoy the journey, just not feel like the journey is just going to get us to some place where we finally get it all fixed. Because I know there are some in this room this morning that have hit a wall, that have had to take a detour in life. There's some here that feel like they've come to a dead end. And for those, I just pray that you would bring some hope to them today. And some comfort again that we are loved by you. We are your children, and that's where we start at. That being good at anything is not earning us anything with you. It's just living out from you. And so we ask you now just to speak to us through, again, some old counsel that maybe can help us learn something, become something, experience something that maybe we haven't before. And by doing that, we'll have taken a step towards maturity. So be with us now, Lord, and bless us with your presence. Amen. Like I said before, the Bible doesn't say anything specific about adulting. It doesn't say that when you get to 18 or 21, depending on what state you're in. It doesn't say anything in the Jewish culture that if when you're 13 or 12 that you've now become a man or a woman. But it does offer some glimpses. So we're going to look at a passage over in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that again has nothing to do with adulting, but has a lot to do with it. So let me give you a little background. It's an interesting passage. Paul is writing this letter to a church in Corinth, and this is actually the second letter he's written. We don't have the first letter, so we call this letter 1 Corinthians, but it actually should be 2 Corinthians, but you can't put something in a book that says 2 Corinthians and 3 Corinthians without 1 Corinthians, and so they've moved those numbers because they've lost it. But this is the letter he's writing to them, and he covers just a ton of stuff here. This book goes on for 15 plus chapters. I mean, it's just this long, long letter. But in this context, he is writing about this idea of meat that is offered to idols, and what do you do as a follower of Jesus? Do you eat that food? Do you not eat that food? And I'm guessing it's an issue that nobody in this room, nobody watching online has had to face this week, right? None of you went into McDonald's and asked them, hey, where'd that meat come from, right? Well, yeah, meat. Yeah, I'm being generous here. But, where did this stuff, and it's not a thing. And so we kind of can read these passages and think, it doesn't have anything to do with me because I'm not eating any meat offered to idols. What does it mean? But Paul is talking about a principle here that goes beyond just this. It goes to the idea of how we see things, how we respond to things, and how we use this thing we call our freedom, both for ourselves and for other people. So here, we'll pick it up in verse 23. And he says, you say, I am allowed to do anything, which again, if you've ever been a teenager, you know that's some words, right? That you just couldn't wait to say, right? But I am old enough now, and I'm allowed to do anything, right? I can have a Diet Coke for breakfast, and nobody can tell me I can't, right? I mean, it's this kind of, we can't wait for that day that we can do stupid decisions and nobody can tell us anything about it. And he's tapping and he says, listen, you say I'm allowed to do anything, kind of this freedom thing, but not everything is good for you. And Paul at this moment sounds like your mother, doesn't he? You can do anything you want, but it's not always good for you. And then he goes again. He says, you say I'm not allowed. You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. And Paul is talking about a very important principle here that is so hard for us sometimes, as adults, to grasp. And that's why we have the freedom to do what we want. Not every choice is a good choice. Not everything we want to do should we do because it's not always good for us, not always beneficial. And then he gets into the heart of it. Don't be concerned for your own good, but for the good of others. He says, as you're kind of free to do whatever you want, think this thing through, Don't just do it for you. Think about other people as you make these choices and decisions. So he says, listen, you may eat any meat that is sold in the marketplace without raising questions of conscience. In fact, he will talk earlier in this passage to say, listen, We all know that meat offered to idols is nothing. I mean, idols are just pieces of wood, pieces of stone. They're statues, they're things that are made. There's nothing really there. He says, so what's the big deal? It's not really a thing. But he says also, we also know that for some people, they're not just worshiping these idols and what they think they represent, they're actually worshiping demons, which changes the whole context here, because if somebody's offered something to a demon, I'm not sure I want to be eating some meat that's been offered to a demon. But he says you got to kind of think this thing through and figure it out for yourself. You can say, hey, it's no big deal, but just think this through. Is it beneficial? Is it good? Not just for me, but for somebody else that I come in contact with. But listen, knock yourself out. Go to the meat market and pick out anything you like. Go home and barbecue it, baste it, bake it, make it a Wellington something. I don't know, just enjoy. Then he goes off on a little bit of a riff there, and he says, listen, if you go to somebody's house and they put some food in front of you, go ahead and eat it. Don't ask them any questions. Don't ask, don't tell. But if they say to you, oh, by the way, this meat was offered to an idol and I'm feeding it to you, then he says you need to kind of back away from that. Think about this. And he says these words. I don't mean that you think it's wrong, that your conscience is telling you it's wrong, because it's not. But the other person might. But why, you ask, should my freedom be judged by someone else's conscience? You ever ask yourself that question or ask somebody else that question? How come my rights, my freedoms are getting trampled because of what they want to do? When I know I'm right, why does my rightness have to be influenced by their foolishness? This doesn't seem fair, Paul. And that's what they're kind of saying. He says, I know you're going to ask me, why should my freedom be judged or tempered or sort of controlled by someone else's conscience? That doesn't seem fair, Paul. To which Paul says, the answer is, if you eat or drink or if you do anything, do it all for the glory of God. The reason your freedom isn't always so free is not because you aren't free, but it's because you're taking into consideration other people. This is more than just your understanding or your beliefs or how you live them out. This is also about thinking about the choices you make and how they impact not just you and what you want to do, but how they might impact other people around you. Never do anything that might hurt others. He gives a whole list there. Jews, because they had their own certain requirements, and so don't do anything to hurt them. And Greeks, they had their own way of looking at things, and don't be offensive to them or God's church. Just as I also try to please everybody in every way, and I want you to understand, when Paul makes a statement, he is not saying it is our job to please everybody in every way. This isn't a blanket principle that says, that's my job, try to please everybody. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, you will discover at some point that you can't please everybody, right? It's a foolish thing. I mean, the reality is God can't even please everybody, right? So it's foolish to think that I can please everybody when God can't please everybody. So he's not making this blanket principle. He's just saying, in this context, as I think about all this, I'm trying to be careful of the choices I make and how they impact other people, and I try to please them if it's possible. I'm not trying to do what is good, advantageous for me. Which, isn't that our goal when we get our freedom? I don't have to live under your rules any longer. I got to be home at a certain time. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I can do whatever I want. And he says, listen, as you adult, as you get into this process, you discover that this is not just simply trying to do what's good for, advantageous for me, but what is good that is advantageous for most people so they can be saved. And in this context, he's talking about how we live out our faith can impact the people around us, and how the choices we make in living out that faith and what we don't do or what we do, that it ought to be tempered by not just how I feel about it, but taking into consideration how they may feel about it, because there's this underlying goal so that they can be saved. And his point is not just to get by, but to live well. And not just for us to live well, but also for others to live well. I'm going to go back to a question. How many of you that are older than 35, we'll go younger, older than 18? How many of you older than 18 have lived, are currently living, have in the past life at some point lived with a roommate? Raise your hand. Pretty good number. Trying to figure out how to do this, Caesar, so I know what the first number was and the second number is. But how many of you would say that was the best, most wonderful experience of your life the whole time? Really? And I'm going to guess that most of you did not raise your hand for a very simple reason. It did not go well, right? I mean, it's a simple reason. But it didn't go well because you both had freedoms, and if it happened early on, one of you thought this way, one of you that way. There's this idea of unmet expectations and all the stuff, and how they did stuff and how you did stuff, and it just didn't work out, and you kind of, it gets all, and it's this whole idea of, this was not a good idea. Any of you ever look back on those things and thought to yourself, if I had handled that differently, things would have turned out differently? Anybody else with me on that? I had a roommate, I think what number it was, probably would have been the second one I had in life. I'd been living in another place with another roommate, and his girlfriend had come over. She was kind of living there, and so then I moved over to this other guy's house. But he had a house that was his grandmother's, and he had taken over it. And I was working nights. I worked at the butcher at that time, so I'd work from 8 o'clock at night till 3:30 in the morning, or sometimes 4:30 in the morning, and so I'd sleep part of the day and get up and stuff. And part of the problem, we got along great, except when it came to taking care of stuff around the house. I was under the assumption that this was his family's house, which meant your family, you take care of things. He was under a different understanding of how this worked, which I thought, hey, I work nights. It throws your whole body off. You're just, you get to the weekend, you try to have a normal life, which means you've stayed up either all day Friday, which when you get to Friday night, you're just exhausted, and then you're going back Sunday. But it became a thing. In fact, it became such a big thing that I ended up leaving, and now he had to take care of everything himself, which was my way of getting back at him. Which, again, not a very adult way of looking at things. But I look back on it and I think, I was just thinking about ways to just get by. I was making sure what worked for me. Forgetting that there was this sort of joint responsibility that we had together in this and through this. And this idea is not just for me to live well, but for them to live well as well. There's a great quote I ran across a couple weeks ago from Joyce Meyer. She says it this way: what's real freedom? Real freedom is being able to not have my way and still be just as happy as if I did. Not typically on our list when we're thinking about freedom, when we're first getting out from underneath our parents' cruel reign, right? We think freedom's going to be, I get to do things my way, but I think she's on to something when she says real freedom is being able to not have my way. And you know what? To be okay with that. Not just okay with that, but still be just as happy without it. So let me sum up Paul's message here in 1 Corinthians 10 very simply. You may want to write this down, by the way. Be a responsible person. And the reality is, right? I mean, that's part of what goes along with becoming an adult, is this idea of responsibility. And it's the part that we don't typically think about when we're on the verge of becoming an adult and not doing our own thing, right? We just think about all the stuff we're getting away with. We don't think about all the responsibilities that come along. Because somebody does have to pay the rent, electricity, the water, the garbage, the cable, if you have cable, the cell phone. Got to fix your car. Got to pay for your car. Got to have insurance for your car. You got to pay this title and taxes every year just to own a car. And at some point, it's recognizing that part of being an adult is simply being a responsible person. And the reality is there are three options when you are faced with responsibility. Number one, I know this is deep, folks. Number two, or number three, right? I mean, again, those of you over 35, those are one of the three choices you make in life every time responsibility comes, right? And sometimes you do number one and number three together. Sometimes you do number two and number three together. Rarely do you do number one and number two together. And it's pretty simple. You know, occasionally I'll do a little bit of marriage counseling, and if you haven't heard me say this, it's been a while since I've said this, if you want to go to a good marriage counselor, do not come see me. Because it's not my thing. I'm not a great counselor. I'm a pretty pragmatic, get right to the point thing. In fact, I will meet with couples up to 3, maybe 4 times, depends on how it's going. So if you're thinking about coming to see me, let me just tell you how it's going to go. You're going to sit down in my room, my office. Each of you will tell me how you see the issue. I will tell you what you need to do to fix it. In a week or 2, we will get back together. I will ask you, have you done what I told you? If at that moment you say no, I give you one more chance. The meeting ends at that moment. I give you another week or 2, we come back. Because I figure you've come to me, right, Dave? You've come to me for help. If you come to me for help, I'm going to give you help. But if you don't want to take my help, you need to go to somebody else, which was my goal the whole time, because you really need to get somebody who knows what they're doing. But so much of the issues we have is the failure to take responsibility for stuff. And so often it's about if they took responsibility. The reality is there is no problem in your relationship that is a you problem or a them problem. It's a you all plural problem. It's an us problem, not a her problem or a his problem. And the only way to fix those things is for people to take responsibility for how we got here and how we're going to get from here. That's marriage counseling today. All right, here we go. Next one. So listen, responsibility is not a difficult concept to grasp, nor is irresponsibility. Irresponsibility is when I don't take responsibility for the things I am responsible for. I told you it's going to get deep today, right? This is deep stuff. But isn't that right? I mean, these aren't hard concepts, and we all know what it's like. We all know what it's like when somebody was supposed to do something, they didn't do something, and we're mad at them now because they didn't do something, and we say, oh, but for us, it's like, well, you know, let me tell you why I was late today, you know, and we have all these reasons of why we were late, but if they're late, oh, man. In fact, I saw a chart, same book I was talking about before. I love this chart. This is the spill assessment process. This is directly for those early adulting people. So if you're over again 35, do not elbow anybody, point at anything. But let's think this thing through, all right? Something is spilled. The first question is, am I busy? If the answer is yes, we leave it until the next designated cleanup time. If the answer is no, the next question is it less than an ounce? If the answer is yes, we leave it till the next designated cleanup time. If the answer is no, we ask the question, is it mayo or anything real sticky? If the answer is yes, we begrudgingly wipe it up. If the answer is nope, we leave it until the next designated cleanup time, right? That tends to be a lot of people's process, not just on spills, but other things. But here is the correct spill assessment process. Again, if you're here with your spouse, leave your spouse alone. This is not directed at them. But this is about the simplicity of responsibility. I mean, think this thing through. Something spilled, you ought to, right? Because here's the reality. It will never be easy to wipe up and now, right? Even though you think it's liquid, it's going to dry, it's going to be better, it's not going to be better. You'll have to do it eventually. Unless you live in one of those magical homes where you spill stuff, you don't do anything about it, and the next time you come in the room, it's all gone. Maybe you grew up in one of those houses, you know? You put trash in your trash receptacle in your bedroom, and it seemed like once a week it just disappeared. And you put your clothes in the dirty clothes hamper, and next thing you know, they were back in your drawers, all folded nicely, everything hung up. And it's great when you're a kid, but at some moment, you're not a kid any longer. Lastly, which you already knew it was going to get grosser anyways there, right? Back to Paul. He says, listen, folks, you say I'm allowed to do anything, and that's really the drive for us to become adults. I can do anything, but I want to remind you again that not everything is good for you. Paul's not trying to step on your toes, dampen it. He's just saying it's not always good for you. You can say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. So let me ask you some questions that we tied up today. What if this week I paid attention to my excuses? What if this week I was a little more cognizant of the things that were happening and the choices I was making and the excuses I was saying of why I didn't do what not only I knew I was supposed to do, but maybe somebody else has told me I'm supposed to do? What would happen this week if I am more sensitive to my blaming and complaining? If I'm just more sensitive, would that make me kind of think more honestly about those things? What if this week I remind myself to use my freedom for everyone's benefit? It's not just freedom for me, but it's about how I use that freedom and how it might help somebody else. And lastly, what if this week I keep asking, am I really taking responsibility? Because here's the bottom line. I want you to make better choices. I want you to have fewer regrets. And I want you to learn some new skills. Because that is the goal for an adult. Because everybody in this room has a story to tell. And we are glad we don't have to tell it today, right? But hopefully we've learned from some of those things. And because we've learned, we were able to make better choices. And because we've made better choices, we have fewer regrets. And then we're always learning new skills. Because the goal for your life and my life that God has for us is that we would be better people. And not be better people in order to earn any sort of rewards from Him or a bigger smile from His face. But God knows if we become better people, how we see ourselves, how we even see the people around us, will be much better for us and for them. So with that said, I hope you'll join us next week as we take another look at adulting.